In the quiet suburban town of Springfield, Illinois, life moved at an unhurried pace. The rows of neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences painted a picture of calmness, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's name. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic community, secrets lurked in the shadows, secrets that would soon unravel with devastating consequences. On the morning of March 10, 2008, the Springfield Police Department received a call that would shatter the tranquility of the town. Anna Clark, a 23-year-old pregnant woman and devoted wife, had vanished. Her husband, Michael, reported her missing after she failed to return from what was supposed to be a routine prenatal checkup with her gynecologist, the highly respected Dr. Leonard Hayes. At first, Michael tried to rationalize her absence. Perhaps she'd stopped at a friend's house or lost track of time. But as the hours dragged on, his worry grew into panic. Anna was not the type to disappear without a word. The town buzzed with speculation. How could someone as gentle and predictable as Anna simply vanish? Friends and neighbors came forward, recounting glimpses of her daily routine, but no one had seen anything unusual. Springfield wasn't the kind of place where people disappeared, and certainly not someone like Anna, a quiet, kind soul who had spent her entire life blending into the background. The police initiated their search, starting with the last place Anna was seen, Dr. Hayes's clinic. The clinic itself was an unassuming brick building on the edge of town, a place where patients often found comfort and care. Dr. Hayes was revered in the community, a man known for his steady hands, warm demeanor, and decades of medical expertise. To many, the mere suggestion of his involvement in Anna's disappearance was unthinkable. Yet, when officers arrived at the clinic that evening, what they discovered would send chills down their spines. As the janitor unlocked a back storage room, a place rarely used, he was met with an overpowering, unnatural odor. At first, he thought it was a broken refrigerator or spoiled medical supplies. But as he stepped closer, he saw something out of place, a blanket awkwardly folded, half hidden behind a stack of sterile boxes. His hand trembled as he pulled it back, revealing what lay beneath. It was Anna. Her lifeless body was concealed with a precision that suggested deliberate planning. She had been strangled with a leather belt, the marks vivid against her pale skin. There were no signs of a struggle, no immediate evidence to suggest anyone had forced their way into the clinic. The scene was cold and calculated, a stark contrast to the man the town had trusted for so long. News of Anna's death spread through Springfield like wildfire. Shock quickly gave way to fear. How could this happen here, in their safe, close-knit community? How could a trusted figure like Dr. Hayes, a man they'd turn to in their most vulnerable moments, be connected to such a horrific crime? People began to whisper, dredging up old stories, piecing together fragments of rumors that now seemed too significant to ignore. What else was Dr. Hayes hiding? As investigators began peeling back the layers of Anna's life, and the life of Dr. Hayes, they discovered that the young woman's death was no random act of violence. Instead, it was the culmination of a web of secrets, manipulation, and betrayal that would expose the darkest corners of both their lives. Springfield would never be the same again. Long before the tragic events of March 2008, Anna Clark had been a girl defined by her quiet nature and the shadows she couldn't escape. Born in 1985 in the small, tight-knit community of Springfield, Illinois, she was the youngest of 3 children in the Clark family. Her father, Thomas Clark, was a man of discipline and pride, a figure who commanded authority in his household. A retired military officer turned insurance salesman, he placed the highest value on success and achievement, qualities he found in abundance in Anna's older brothers, Matthew and David. Thomas adored his sons, often boasting about Matthew's football trophies and David's academic scholarships. His praise was loud and relentless, filling the Clark home with stories of their triumphs. For Anna, it was a different story. She was quiet, artistic, and unassuming, qualities her father dismissed as inconsequential. "You should take after your brothers," he would often say, a refrain that cut deep into her self-esteem. Anna grew up feeling unseen, an afterthought in her own family. Her mother, Margaret Clark, was no better. While she loved Anna in her own passive way, Margaret lacked the strength to confront Thomas's favoritism. She smoothed over family tensions with placating smiles and soft-spoken reassurances, but she never stood up for Anna. Margaret often brushed off her daughter's frustrations, saying, "Your father means well, dear. He just wants what's best for you." Over time, Anna stopped seeking comfort altogether. Instead, she withdrew into herself, retreating into the world of sketchbooks and watercolors, a place where she felt safe from judgment. In school, Anna's reserved demeanor made her nearly invisible. She excelled in art classes, her teachers occasionally praising her talent, but even those moments of recognition were fleeting. Her achievements paled in comparison to her brothers, whose every accomplishment was celebrated with family dinners and neighborhood parties. By the time Anna graduated high school in 2003, she had become accustomed to living in the background. Her classmates remembered her as the quiet girl who sat in the corner, never causing trouble, never standing out. When Anna moved on to college in Springfield, she hoped for a fresh start, a chance to step out of the shadow of her family. But the insecurities that had taken root in her childhood followed her. She struggled to make meaningful connections, often doubting her worth in the eyes of others. Her roommates came and went, friendships faded, and Anna found herself more isolated than ever. Her passion for art, once a source of solace, began to wane under the weight of self-doubt. It was during this time of uncertainty that Anna met Michael Clark. In 2004, she attended a charity event at a local community center, volunteering to design posters for the fundraiser. Michael, a confident and outgoing young man, was running the event's logistics. Where others had overlooked Anna, Michael noticed her immediately. He was drawn to her gentle demeanor and the quiet strength he sensed beneath the surface. For Anna, Michael was a revelation. For the first time, someone truly saw her, not as an extension of her family or as a wallflower, but as herself. Their connection was instant and deep. Michael brought light into Anna's life, encouraging her to embrace her talents and reminding her that she was worthy of love and recognition. By the following year, they were inseparable, and in early 2006, they were married. For Anna, Michael represented hope, a chance to finally escape her insecurities and build a life where she could be more than the quiet girl in the shadows. But married life was not the fairy tale Anna had envisioned. Michael's career in marketing began to demand more of his time, leaving Anna alone for long stretches in their modest Springfield home. Though he remained supportive and loving, Michael's attention shifted to building their future, inadvertently leaving Anna to wrestle with the ghosts of her past. The pregnancy, discovered in late 2006, brought its own mix of joy and anxiety. Anna worried whether she could be a good mother, whether she could provide the kind of emotional support she had longed for as a child. These doubts festered in Anna's mind, gnawing at the fragile confidence she had begun to build with Michael. She felt lost again, struggling to reconcile the image of the life she wanted with the reality she faced. When her obstetrician referred her to Dr. Leonard Hayes in mid-2007, Anna thought little of it at first. Yet, her encounters with the charismatic doctor would soon draw her into a web of attention, manipulation, and control, one that preyed on the very insecurities she had tried so hard to leave behind. As Anna's past collided with her present, the seeds of her eventual downfall were already being sown. Her longing for validation, her unresolved childhood wounds, and her inability to escape the cycle of being overlooked would make her vulnerable in ways she could never foresee. And in the shadows, Dr. Hayes was waiting. When Anna Clark first met Dr. Leonard Hayes in the summer of 2007, it seemed like a routine referral. Her primary obstetrician, concerned about a minor complication in her pregnancy, had recommended the seasoned gynecologist for a more specialized level of care. Dr. Hayes was a pillar of the Springfield community, a man whose reputation as a compassionate and skilled physician preceded him. For Anna, whose pregnancy was already fraught with anxiety and self-doubt, walking into his clinic felt like stepping into a sanctuary. Dr. Hayes greeted her with a warm, practiced smile that immediately put her at ease. His office, adorned with tasteful decor and calming pastel colors, exuded professionalism and comfort. During their first appointment, he listened attentively as Anna nervously explained her concerns about motherhood. "You'll be a wonderful mother," he assured her, his voice steady and reassuring. "You just need to trust yourself more." It was a simple sentiment, but it struck a chord deep within Anna. Here was someone who seemed to see through her walls of insecurity, someone who offered the validation she had long craved. Unlike her father, who dismissed her fears, or Michael, who was often too busy to notice them, Dr. Hayes gave her his full attention. His gentle manner and thoughtful questions made Anna feel truly heard, something she hadn't experienced in years. As her appointments continued, Dr. Hayes began to blur the lines of professionalism, though it was subtle at first. He asked her about her childhood, her relationship with her parents, and her fears about raising a child. Anna, who was used to bottling up her emotions, found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. Each question peeled back another layer of vulnerability, leaving her exposed but oddly comforted. What Anna didn't realize was that this was all part of Dr. Hayes's calculated method. Behind his reassuring demeanor was a man who thrived on control, someone who had honed his ability to exploit vulnerability over decades. His inquiries were not mere gestures of concern, they were tools to assess her weaknesses, to understand what made her tick. By the fall of 2007, the dynamic between Anna and Dr. Hayes had shifted. What had started as a strictly professional relationship now carried undertones of something else entirely. The doctor began to linger just a little too long during their conversations, his compliments becoming increasingly personal. "You're remarkable, Anna," he told her one day, his voice low and deliberate. "Michael is lucky to have someone like you." Anna, desperate for validation, dismissed the discomfort these moments caused. She told herself it was harmless, that Dr. Hayes was simply kind. But as her pregnancy progressed, the boundaries between them continued to dissolve. Dr. Hayes scheduled late evening appointments for her, times when the clinic was empty and the staff had gone home. "It'll be quieter," he explained, his tone so casual that Anna didn't question it. These private meetings became their norm, and with each one, Anna found herself more ensnared in a relationship she couldn't quite define. Dr. Hayes had a way of making her feel special, even cherished. He praised her strength, her resilience, her ability to endure challenges. For a woman who had spent most of her life feeling invisible, his attention was intoxicating. Yet, there was an undercurrent of unease that Anna couldn't shake. She began to notice the way Dr. Hayes's eyes lingered a little too long, the way his hand occasionally brushed hers during an appointment. She told herself it was innocent, that she was imagining things. But deep down, a voice she tried to ignore whispered that something wasn't right. By late October 2007, the line was crossed. After a particularly emotional session, where Anna had confided her fears about being an inadequate mother, Dr. Hayes stepped closer to her than he ever had before. "You don't give yourself enough credit," he said, his voice soft but insistent. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, then slid down her arm. It was a gesture that sent shivers down her spine, not from fear, but from a confusion she couldn't articulate. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. The memory of his touch lingered, tangled with guilt and a strange sense of flattery. She convinced herself that she had overreacted, that Dr. Hayes hadn't meant anything by it. After all, he was her doctor, a trusted professional. But in the weeks that followed, their interactions became more charged. He began making subtle remarks about her appearance, about the connection they shared. Anna knew she should pull away, but she couldn't. His attention filled a void within her, one that had been empty for so long. Dr. Hayes, sensing her hesitation, carefully escalated his advances. He framed their late-night meetings as a way to ensure her pregnancy went smoothly, but the appointments had little to do with medical care. He asked her about her marriage, her dreams, her regrets. Anna, caught between the security of his attention and the guilt of betraying Michael, found herself trapped in a web she couldn't escape. By November 2007, their relationship had become unmistakably personal. Late-night conversations turned into stolen touches, then something more. What had started as a safe space for Anna had become a cage, one where Dr. Hayes held the key. And though she tried to convince herself that she was still in control, the truth was that she had already lost it. By late November of 2007, the relationship between Anna Clark and Dr. Leonard Hayes had transformed into something far darker than Anna could have ever imagined. What had begun as fleeting moments of attention and validation had escalated into a full-blown affair, one cloaked in secrecy and weighed down by guilt. Dr. Hayes had expertly dismantled Anna's boundaries, using her insecurities as tools of manipulation. What Anna didn't realize was that she had entered a game she couldn't win, a game in which Dr. Hayes held all the power. At first, Anna tried to rationalize her actions. She told herself that her connection with Dr. Hayes was harmless, that it filled a void Michael couldn't. After all, Michael was still the loving husband he'd always been, devoted, hardworking, and oblivious to the turmoil brewing in Anna's heart. He worked long hours, pouring himself into a marketing job that promised stability for their growing family. His excitement for their future, for their unborn child, was genuine. Yet, in his effort to build a life for them, he failed to notice the cracks forming in Anna's carefully constructed facade. For Anna, the duality of her life became unbearable. At home, she played the role of the devoted wife, smiling through Michael's anecdotes about his day and helping him plan for the baby. But at night, she lay awake, consumed by guilt and shame. She wanted to believe that her relationship with Dr. Hayes could end as easily as it had begun, but every attempt to distance herself only drew her deeper into his orbit. Dr. Hayes, sensing her hesitation, began to tighten his grip. The charm that had once made Anna feel special now took on a sinister edge. When she tried to cancel their late-night appointments, he would call her, his voice laced with subtle accusations. "I thought we had something real," he would say, his tone both pleading and accusatory. "You can't just walk away from this." Anna, desperate to maintain some semblance of control, confronted him during one of their meetings. "This has to stop," she said, her voice trembling as she avoided his gaze. "It's wrong, and I can't keep doing this." But Dr. Hayes was not a man who accepted rejection easily. His calm demeanor shifted, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer. "You think you can just leave?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "What about the messages? The photos? Do you want Michael to see them? Or the people in this town? Imagine what they'd think." Anna's blood ran cold. She hadn't considered the full weight of the evidence he held against her. In moments of weakness, she had confided in him through text messages, shared pieces of herself she now wished she could take back. She had sent him photos, not explicit, but intimate enough to devastate her if they ever surfaced. Dr. Hayes had collected these pieces like a predator setting a trap, and now, the jaws were closing. From that moment on, their relationship became a prison. Dr. Hayes controlled when they met, what they discussed, and how Anna behaved. He framed his threats as concern for her well-being, saying things like, "I just want to protect you, Anna. You don't know what people would do if they found out." His words were both a warning and a reminder of the power he wielded. At home, Anna's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She avoided Michael's touch, flinching at his kindness, unable to reconcile his unwavering love with the betrayal she carried. Michael, while perceptive enough to notice her unease, attributed it to the stress of the pregnancy. "You're going to be an amazing mom," he told her one evening, holding her close. His words, meant to reassure, only deepened her despair. By December, Anna was spiraling. She spent her days in a fog of anxiety, constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced that everyone around her knew her secret. At the clinic, Dr. Hayes's control over her tightened. He began making explicit demands, insisting she come to his office at odd hours or meet him in places outside the clinic. When she hesitated, he reminded her of the consequences. "You don't want this getting back to Michael, do you?" he'd say, his tone deceptively soft. Anna's attempts to regain control were met with swift resistance. When she tried to ignore his calls, he showed up unannounced at her house, claiming he was just checking in on her pregnancy. When she threatened to expose him, he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Go ahead," he said. "But remember, I'm not the one who has everything to lose." For Anna, the walls were closing in. She no longer felt like the woman who had sought comfort in Dr. Hayes's attention. Instead, she was a pawn in his game, trapped by her own mistakes and his calculated manipulation. Her pregnancy, once a source of joy, now felt like a weight she couldn't bear. She knew she needed to escape, but every path seemed blocked by Dr. Hayes's looming presence. The man who had once made her feel seen now held her in a vice grip, his promises of protection morphing into threats of exposure. Anna was no longer just a young woman caught in a bad decision, she was a prisoner of fear, held captive by a man who would stop at nothing to maintain control. And as the days crept closer to the new year, Anna began to realize that the only way out might come at an unimaginable cost. As December 2007 rolled into January 2008, Anna Clark found herself spiraling deeper into the control of Dr. Leonard Hayes. The once comforting words that had made her feel seen now felt like chains, binding her to a man whose intentions were far darker than she could have imagined. The pressure was unbearable, and the fear of exposure loomed over her every waking moment. What Anna didn't yet realize was that she wasn't the first woman to fall prey to Dr. Hayes, and she wouldn't be the last. The first crack in Dr. Hayes's polished facade appeared during one of Anna's late-night appointments. The clinic was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of a distant air conditioner. As Dr. Hayes prepared to leave the room after yet another private discussion, Anna noticed something strange on his desk. A photo, half-tucked beneath a stack of patient files, caught her eye. It was a young woman, smiling brightly, her face eerily familiar. Anna froze, her heartbeat quickening as she recognized the woman, Bethany Moore, a neighbor she'd occasionally seen in the park near her home. Bethany had recently left Springfield under mysterious circumstances, and rumors about her abrupt departure had been the talk of the town. Anna's curiosity grew. Why did Dr. Hayes have Bethany's photo? She couldn't shake the unease it stirred within her. That night, as she lay in bed next to Michael, her mind raced. Could Bethany have been in a similar situation? Was it possible that Dr. Hayes had manipulated her too? The thought was almost too much to bear. In the days that followed, Anna began piecing together fragments of conversations and subtle cues she had overlooked. She remembered how Dr. Hayes occasionally mentioned other patients, always young women, always in passing. His comments had once seemed innocuous, but now they took on a more sinister tone. Bethany was special, he had said during one session. She reminded me of you in many ways, so strong, so unique. At the time, Anna had brushed it off as another attempt at flattery. Now, it felt like something far more calculated. Driven by a growing sense of dread, Anna decided to confront Bethany directly. She tracked down her contact information through a mutual acquaintance and called her, her voice trembling as she introduced herself. Bethany was hesitant at first, reluctant to talk about her past. But as Anna pressed, sharing her own experiences with Dr. Hayes, the floodgates opened. Through tears, Bethany revealed that she, too, had been ensnared by Dr. Hayes. Her story mirrored Anna's, the late-night appointments, the intrusive questions, the gradual erosion of boundaries. He made me feel like I was the only one who understood him, Bethany confessed. But when I tried to leave, he turned into someone I didn't recognize. He threatened me, Anna. He said he'd ruin my life if I ever told anyone. Bethany's departure from Springfield had been a desperate attempt to escape Dr. Hayes's grasp. She had left everything behind, her family, her friends, her job, just to regain her freedom. Hearing this, Anna's fear turned to anger. She wasn't alone in her suffering, and she began to see Dr. Hayes for what he truly was, a predator who thrived on manipulating vulnerable women. Armed with this knowledge, Anna started digging deeper. She began discreetly asking around, speaking to women she knew had been patients of Dr. Hayes. At first, most were unwilling to talk, too ashamed or afraid to confront their own experiences. But as Anna persisted, more stories began to surface. Each account painted the same chilling picture: Dr. Hayes was a master manipulator, a man who used his position of power to exploit those who trusted him most. Anna's investigation led her to a revelation that shook her to the core. Elaine Hayes, Dr. Hayes's wife, had been aware of her husband's behavior for years. Elaine, once a prominent figure in Springfield's social circles, had quietly withdrawn from public life, a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Through a mutual friend, Anna learned that Elaine had confided in a select few about her suspicions but had done nothing to stop her husband. "It's complicated," Elaine had reportedly said. "He's not a bad man, not really. He just loses control sometimes." This revelation added a new layer to Anna's growing terror. Not only was Dr. Hayes a dangerous man, but his actions were also being enabled by those closest to him. Elaine's silence was complicit, allowing her husband to continue his predatory behavior unchecked. The power dynamic between the couple mirrored the control Dr. Hayes exerted over his patients, a web of manipulation and fear that trapped everyone it touched. By the end of January 2008, Anna was at a breaking point. The weight of her discovery was suffocating, and the knowledge that she was just one of many victims filled her with both rage and despair. She wanted to expose Dr. Hayes, to shatter the pristine image he had cultivated in Springfield. But the question remained, how? He held all the cards, from her compromising photos to his sterling reputation. The realization that she was just another pawn in Dr. Hayes's twisted game was devastating. Yet, it also ignited a spark of defiance. Anna knew she couldn't stay silent, not anymore. But as she began to formulate a plan, she underestimated just how far Dr. Hayes was willing to go to keep his secrets buried. By February 2008, the walls were closing in on Anna Clark. The knowledge she had uncovered about Dr. Leonard Hayes weighed heavily on her. The realization that he had manipulated not just her, but other vulnerable women, filled her with anger and a growing determination to break free. Yet, the fear of what he might do kept her paralyzed. He held too much power over her, her secrets, her shame, her very sense of safety. Anna knew that she could no longer live like this. Every day felt like a battle between her guilt over betraying Michael and the suffocating control Hayes exerted over her life. She avoided Michael's gaze at home, feeling unworthy of his kindness. She flinched every time her phone buzzed, dreading another message from Hayes. Sleep became a luxury, as she spent her nights haunted by the weight of her secrets and the growing danger she felt closing in. On February 3, 2008, Anna made a decision: she would confront Dr. Hayes and end things once and for all. She rehearsed what she would say, writing down the words in a small notebook she kept hidden in the drawer of her bedside table. She would tell him that she was done, that she would no longer be controlled by his threats. And if he didn't let her go, she would tell Michael everything, consequences be damned. That evening, Anna arrived at the clinic just after it had closed. The parking lot was nearly empty, the building eerily quiet under the glow of the streetlights. She had chosen this time deliberately, hoping the absence of staff would give her the privacy to confront Hayes without causing a scene. Her hands trembled as she gripped the handle of the clinic's glass door, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Hayes was waiting for her in his office. He greeted her with the same composed smile that had once put her at ease, but now only filled her with unease. "Anna," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "You look upset. What's on your mind?" She didn't sit. Instead, she stood in the doorway, her fists clenched at her sides. "This has to stop," she said, her voice shaking but firm. I'm done. I'm not coming back here, and I'm not letting you control me anymore. Hayes's smile faltered, his expression darkening. Anna, he began, his tone low and measured, you don't mean that. You're upset. Let's sit down and talk about this. No, she snapped, surprising even herself with the force of her words. I'm serious. I'm done. If you try to stop me, I'll tell Michael everything. I'll go to the police if I have to. For a moment, Hayes said nothing. Then, he stood, his movements slow and deliberate. Do you really think that's a good idea? He asked, his voice chillingly calm. What do you think will happen to you if this gets out? Do you think Michael will forgive you? Do you think anyone will believe you over me? Anna felt a pang of doubt, but she pushed it aside. I don't care, she said. I'm not afraid of you anymore. That was the moment everything changed. Hayes's composure cracked, revealing the man beneath the polished exterior. His eyes burned with a mixture of rage and desperation. You should be afraid, he said, his voice now a menacing growl. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Anna's breath hitched as he stepped closer, his presence suffocating. But she held her ground, refusing to let him intimidate her. Do whatever you want, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm done. Hayes stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, he turned away, his movements tense and calculated. Get out, he said, his back to her. But remember this, if you ever try to ruin me, I'll make sure you regret it. Anna didn't wait for him to change his mind. She turned and left, her legs trembling as she walked out of the clinic. But as she drove home, a sense of dread crept over her. She had stood up to him, yes, but she knew Hayes wasn't the type to let go so easily. And she was right. Over the next few days, Hayes's behavior became increasingly erratic. He called her at all hours, leaving messages that veered between pleading and threatening. He showed up outside her house, his car parked down the street, watching. Anna tried to ignore him, tried to convince herself that he would eventually give up. But deep down, she knew that Hayes wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. On the morning of March 6, 2008, Anna decided to take matters into her own hands. She wrote a letter to Michael, explaining everything, her affair, Hayes's threats, her fear. She planned to give it to him that evening, to finally come clean and put an end to the nightmare. But she never got the chance. That afternoon, Anna went to the clinic for what was supposed to be her final confrontation with Hayes. She never returned. By the time Michael reported her missing, it was already too late. Later that night, police discovered her lifeless body hidden in a back room of the clinic. She had been strangled with a leather belt, her death as calculated as it was cold. For Michael, Anna's disappearance was the beginning of a nightmare. For the town of Springfield, it was the unmasking of a man they had trusted for decades. And for Anna, it was the tragic end to a life defined by shadows she could never fully escape. The discovery of Anna Clark's lifeless body in the back room of Dr. Leonard Hayes's clinic on the night of March 6, 2008, sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Springfield. For a community that prided itself on trust and familiarity, the brutal death of a young, expectant mother at the hands of one of its most respected members was unimaginable. Yet, as the investigation unfolded, it became chillingly clear that Anna's murder was only the beginning of the secrets the town would uncover. The police moved quickly, sealing off the clinic and treating it as a crime scene. Anna's body was found carefully concealed, a deliberate attempt to delay its discovery. The methodical nature of the crime, the lack of struggle, the precision with which she had been strangled, and the meticulous way her body was hidden, pointed to a killer who had planned every detail. Investigators were certain of one thing: this was no crime of passion. It was premeditated. Michael Clark, devastated and desperate for answers, became a central figure in the investigation. His heartbreak was evident as he recounted Anna's recent behavior to detectives, her growing anxiety, her reluctance to share what was troubling her, and the increasing distance between them in the weeks leading up to her death. "She wasn't herself," Michael said during his interview. "I knew something was wrong, but she wouldn't tell me. I thought it was just the stress of the pregnancy." His account painted a picture of a woman trapped in fear, but the pieces didn't fully come together until investigators began looking deeper into her relationship with Dr. Hayes. The first breakthrough came from Anna's phone records. Text messages and call logs revealed frequent communication between Anna and Dr. Hayes outside of professional hours. Some of the messages, recovered through forensic analysis, were explicit, implicating Hayes in a relationship that went far beyond that of a doctor and patient. This evidence raised immediate red flags. Why was a respected gynecologist engaging in such inappropriate contact with one of his patients? And what had led their relationship to end in such a violent manner? As police delved further into Dr. Hayes's life, a pattern began to emerge. Other women, emboldened by the news of Anna's death, started coming forward with their own unsettling accounts. Bethany Moore, who had fled Springfield months earlier, contacted authorities after learning about the investigation. Her story corroborated many of Anna's experiences: the inappropriate comments, the gradual erosion of boundaries, and the escalating threats when she tried to pull away. But Bethany wasn't the only one. Several other former patients shared similar stories, describing Hayes as a man who thrived on control. He had cultivated an image of professionalism and care, but beneath that veneer was a predator who exploited the trust of vulnerable women. Each account painted a damning portrait of a man who had spent years abusing his position of power. The most damning evidence, however, came from within the clinic itself. A search of Dr. Hayes's office revealed a collection of personal items belonging to various patients, photographs, letters, and even recordings of private sessions. Among them was a folder labeled with Anna's name. Inside, investigators found explicit messages, compromising photos, and detailed notes Hayes had kept about their interactions. These notes documented not only his manipulation of Anna but also his growing obsession with her and his attempts to maintain control as their relationship deteriorated. The investigation also brought to light the role of Elaine Hayes, Leonard's wife. While she wasn't directly implicated in Anna's murder, it became clear that she had long been aware of her husband's behavior. Witnesses described Elaine as a withdrawn and subdued woman who rarely left their home. A former friend revealed that Elaine had confided her suspicions about Leonard's affairs years earlier but had chosen to remain silent, fearing the scandal would destroy their family. "He's not a bad man," Elaine had said, echoing the rationalizations of so many enablers. "He just needs help." Elaine's silence, however, was damning in its own way. By turning a blind eye to Leonard's actions, she had allowed his predatory behavior to continue unchecked, enabling the cycle of abuse that ultimately led to Anna's death. The town of Springfield, once so willing to revere the Hayes family, now grappled with the realization that their trust had been misplaced. As the case against Dr. Hayes solidified, the community's outrage grew. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? How many other women had suffered in silence, their voices drowned out by Hayes's carefully constructed image of respectability? The betrayal felt personal for many, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and blind trust. On March 12, 2008, Dr. Leonard Hayes was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder, as well as multiple counts of misconduct and abuse of power. The arrest brought a sense of relief to the town but also left lingering questions. How had someone so deeply embedded in their community managed to hide his true nature for so long? And could justice truly undo the damage he had caused? For Michael Clark, the arrest was little consolation. The loss of Anna and their unborn child was a wound that no court verdict could heal. But he vowed to ensure that her story wouldn't be forgotten, that her life, and her death, would serve as a warning to others. As the investigation wrapped up, Springfield was left to grapple with its new reality. The trust that had once defined the community was shattered, replaced by an uneasy awareness of the darkness that could hide behind even the most trusted faces. And while Dr. Hayes awaited his trial, the echoes of his actions reverberated through the town, a chilling reminder of the lives he had forever changed. The trial of Dr. Leonard Hayes, which began in January 2009, captivated not only the small town of Springfield but the nation at large. What had started as a tragic case of murder quickly unraveled into a story of power, manipulation, and the systemic failures that allowed one man to prey on vulnerable women for years. For the Clark family, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to confront the man who had destroyed their lives. For the community, it was an opportunity to reflect on how trust can be so easily exploited. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Hayes, a skilled manipulator who used his authority as a respected doctor to control and exploit women, culminating in the murder of Anna Clark when she threatened to expose him. They presented overwhelming evidence: the folder of messages and photos found in his office, testimonies from former patients like Bethany Moore, and forensic evidence linking Hayes to the murder weapon. Hayes's carefully constructed image of a compassionate doctor crumbled under the weight of these revelations. Hayes's defense team attempted to argue that his relationship with Anna had been consensual, portraying her as an emotionally unstable woman who had pushed him to his breaking point. But their narrative failed to account for the mountain of evidence that showed Hayes's pattern of predatory behavior. The jury, after deliberating for only 2 days, found him guilty of first-degree murder, as well as multiple counts of professional misconduct and abuse of power. On April 15, 2009, Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Clark family, the verdict brought a sense of closure but no real comfort. Michael Clark, who had lost both his wife and unborn child, spoke during the sentencing hearing. His words were a mixture of heartbreak and resilience. "Anna deserved better," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "She deserved to feel safe, to be loved, and to raise our child in a world free from fear. No sentence can bring her back, but I hope this ensures no one else suffers the way she did." In the aftermath of the trial, the community of Springfield struggled to move forward. The trust they had placed in Dr. Hayes, a man they had once revered, had been irreparably shattered. His name became synonymous with betrayal and deceit, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. Many in the town began advocating for stricter oversight of medical professionals, demanding changes to prevent such abuses in the future. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Anna's story was the courage it inspired in others. Former patients of Hayes and victims of similar abuses began speaking out, sharing their own stories and pushing for justice. Organizations dedicated to supporting survivors of abuse saw a surge in donations and volunteers, as the community rallied to ensure that Anna's death would not be in vain. Michael, now a single father in spirit, turned his grief into action. He established the Anna Clark Foundation, a non-profit organization aimed at raising awareness about the abuse of power and providing resources for victims. The foundation became a beacon of hope for many, a symbol of Anna's legacy. For Springfield, and for anyone who followed the case, Anna Clark's story was a painful reminder of the fragility of trust and the strength required to confront injustice. It highlighted the importance of vigilance, of questioning those in positions of authority, and of speaking out against abuse, no matter how powerful the perpetrator may seem. As we close this chapter, we ask you, our viewers, what do you think about Anna's story? Could anything have been done to stop Dr. Hayes sooner? How do we, as a society, hold those in power accountable while protecting the vulnerable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together, we can ensure stories like Anna's are not forgotten. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth and challenge us to make the world a better place.